While Buffalo Roamed, Special Episode 2, a Beckwourth Bedtime Story. Some of the following story takes place in future Colorado, and it definitely all takes place in the Jefferson Territory, so there's that. This is a random Beckwourth story. I fanned the book and stopped on the story. This would have been William Ashley's second trapping expedition in the Rocky Mountains. At that time, William Ashley was co-owner of the Rocky Mountain Fur Company, Episode 2, the year 1825. Let's get right into it, like a kung fu movie, in and out. Not finding any game for a number of days, we again felt alarmed for our safety. The snow was deep on the ground, and our poor horses could obtain no food but the boughs and bark of the cottonwood trees. Still, we pushed forward, seeking to advance as far as possible in order to open a trade with the Indians and occupy ourselves in trapping during the finish of the season. We were again put on reduced rations, 1 pint of beans per day being the allowance to a mess of 4 men, with other articles in proportion. Here, I had a serious difficulty with our general, which arose in the following manner. The general desired me to shoe his horse, which I cheerfully proceeded to do. I had finished setting 3 shoes, and had yet 1 nail to drive in the 4th. When about to drive that last nail, the horse, which had been very restless during the whole time, withdrew his foot from me. My patience becoming exhausted, I applied the hammer several times to his belly, which is the usual punishment inflicted by blacksmiths upon unruly horses. The general, who was standing near, flew into a violent rage and poured his curses thick and fast upon me. Feeling hurt at such language from the lips of a man whom I had treated like my own brother, I retorted, reminding him of the many obligations he owed me. I told him his language to me was harsh and unmerited, that I had thus far served him faithfully, that I had done for him what no other man would do, periling my life for him on several occasions, that I have been successful in killing game when his men were in a state of starvation, and, warming at the recapitulation, I added, "There's 1 more nail to drive, General, to finish shoeing that horse, which you may drive yourself, or let go undriven, for I will see you dead before I'll lift another finger to serve you." But little more was said on either side at that time. The next morning the general gave orders to pack up and move on. He showed me a worn-out horse, which he ordered me to pack and drive along. Now, I very well knew that that horse could not travel far, even without a pack. Still, influenced by the harsh language the general had addressed to me on the previous day, I said, "General, I will pack that horse, but I wish you to understand that whenever it gives out, there I leave him, horse and pack." "Obey my orders and let me have none of your insolence, sir," said the general. I was satisfied. This was imposed upon me for punishment. I, however, packed the horse with 2 pigs of lead and sundry small articles, and drove him along in the rear, the others having started a considerable time previous. The poor animal struggled on for about a mile, and then fell groaning under his burden. I unpacked him, assisted him to rise, and repacked him, drove him on again in the trail that the others had left in the snow. Proceeding half a mile farther, he fell again. I went through the same ceremony as before. He advanced a few yards and fell for a 3rd time. Feeling mad at the general for imposing such a task upon me, my hands tingling with cold through the handling of the snowy pack ropes, I seized my hammer from the pack and, striking with all my power, it penetrated the poor animal's skull. "Take that," said I, "and I only wish you were Ashley." "You do you?" said a voice from the bushes on the side of the trail. I knew the voice. It was the general himself, and another volley of curses descended uninterruptedly upon my head. I was not the man to flinch. "What I said I meant," I exclaimed, "and it makes no odds whether you heard it or not. "You are an infernal scoundrel, and I'll shoot you." And, suiting the action to the word, he cocked his piece and leveled it. I cocked my rifle and presented it also. And then we stood at bay, looking at each other direct in the eye. "General," I at length said, "you have addressed language to me which I allow no man to use, and unless you retract that last epithet, you or I must surely die." He finally said, "I will acknowledge that it was language which never should be used to a man, but when I'm angry I'm apt to speak hastily." But he added, "I will make you suffer for this." "Not in your service, General," I replied. "You can take your horse now and do what you please with him. I am going to return to St. Louis." The General almost smiled at the idea. "You will pay hell going back to St. Louis," he said, "when in truth you were afraid of being killed by the Indians, through being left too far behind with that old horse." I left general, horse, and pack, and started on to overtake the advanced party, in order to get my saddlebags before leaving them. Approaching the party, I advanced to Fitzpatrick, in whose possession they were, and addressing him, "Hold up, Fitzpatrick. Give me my saddlebags. I'm going to leave you. I'm going to return to St. Louis." "What?" exclaimed he. "Have you had more words with the general?" "Yes," I replied, "words that will never be forgiven by me, at least, in this life. I'm bound to return." "Well," said he, "wait till we encamp. A few 100 yards ahead your things are in the pack. When we stop, you can get them." I accompanied them till they camped. Then, taking my goods from the pack, I was getting ready to return when the general came up. Seeing me about to carry my threat into execution, he addressed me, "Jim, you have ammunition belonging to me. You cannot take that with you." Luckily, I had plenty of my own, so I delivered up all in my possession belonging to him. "Sir," I said, "as fortune has favored me with plenty, I deliver up yours. But if I had none of my own, I would have retained a portion of yours or died in the attempt. And it seems to me that you must have a very small soul to see a man turned adrift without anything to protect him against hostile savages or procure him necessary food in traveling this wide wilderness." He then said no more to me, but called Fitzpatrick and requested him to dissuade me from leaving. Fitzpatrick came and exerted all his eloquence to deter me from going, telling me of the great distance before me and the danger I ran when alone of being killed by Indians, representing the almost certain fact that I must perish from starvation. He reminded me that it was now March and the snows were already melting, that spring with all its beauties would soon be ushered in, and I should lose the sublime scenery of the Rocky Mountains. But my mind was bent upon going. All my former love for the man was forfeited, and I felt I could never endure his presence again. Fitzpatrick's mission having failed, the general sent a French boy to intercede, toward whom I felt great attachment. He was named Baptiste La Juanesse, and was about 17 years of age. I had many times protected this lad from the abuse of his countrymen, and had several battles on his account, for which reason he naturally fled to me for protection, and had grown to regard me in the light of a father. When this boy saw that I was in earnest about leaving, fearing that all his attempts at persuasion would be useless, he hung his nether lip and appeared perfectly disconsolate. The general, calling this lad to him, desired him to come to me and persuade me from the notion of leaving. He pledged his word to Baptiste that he would say no more to displease me, that he would spare no efforts to accommodate me, and offered me free use of his horses, assigning as reason for this concession that he was unwilling for word to reach the States that he had suffered a man to perish in the wilderness through a private little difficulty in the camp. At this moment the youth presented himself, manifesting by his appearance that he had something of importance to communicate. "General," said he, "more than half of the men are determined to leave with Beckwourth. They are now taking ammunition from the sacks and hiding it about. What is to be done?" "I will do the best I can." Then turning to the lad, he said, "I took Jim's ammunition thinking to deter him from going. Had he insisted upon going, I should have furnished him with plenty. Go now," he added, "and tell him I want him to stay, but if he insists upon going, to take whatever he wants." Baptiste left the group which surrounded the general and made his way to me with his head inclined. "Mon fier," said the lad, addressing me as I sat, "the general talk much good. He want you to stay. I tell him you no stay, that you're leaving. I tell him if mon fier go, by gar I go too. He say you go talk to Jim and get him to stay. I'll tell you what I think. You stay leetle longer, and if the general talk you bad one more time, then we go, by gar. You take von good horse, me take von good horse too. We carry our blanket, we take some meat and some powder, then we live. We go now, we take nothing, then we die." I knew the boy gave good advice, and foregoing my former resolve, I concluded to remain. My decision was quickly communicated to the whole camp, and the hidden parcels of ammunition were restored to their proper places. The storm in the camp ceased, and all were ready to proceed. I have heard scores of immigrants, when stopping with me in my hermitage in Beckwourth Valley, California, relate their hair-breadth escapes from Indians and various hardships endured in their passage across the plains. They would dwell upon their perilous nights when standing guard, their encounters with Indians, or some daring exploit with a buffalo. These recitals were listened to with incredulous ears, for there is in human nature such a love for the marvelous that traditionary deeds, by dint of repetition, become appropriated to the narrator, and the tales that were related as actual experience now mislead the speaker and the audience. When I recurred to my own adventures, I would smile at the comparison of their suffering with what myself and other men of the mountains had really endured in frontier times. The forts that now afford protection to the traveler were built by ourselves at the constant peril of our lives amid Indian tribes nearly double their present numbers. Without wives and children to confront us on our lonely way, without well-furnished wagons to resort to when hungry, no roads before us, but trails temporarily made, our clothing consisting of the skins of the animals that had fallen before our unerring rifles, and often whole days on insufficient rations, or entirely without food. Occasionally, our whole party on guard the entire night, and our strength deserting us through unceasing watching and fatigue. These are the sufferings that made theirs appear trivial, and ours surpass in magnitude my power of relation. Without doubt, many immigrants were subjected to considerable hardship during the early part of the emigration by loss of cattle, and the Indians came in for their full share of blame. But it was through extreme carelessness that so many were lost, and those who have charged their losses upon the Indians have frequently found their stock, or a portion of it, harnessed to wagons either far in advance of them or lagging carelessly in their rear. The morality of the whites I have not found to exceed very much that of the red man. There are plenty of the former belonging to trains on the routes who would not hesitate to take an ox or two, if any chance offered for getting hold of them. But to return. At the time when I concluded to proceed with the party, we were encamped in the prairie, away from any stream, having passed the fork of the Platte, and were again in a starving condition. Except an occasional hare or rabbit, there was no sign of supplying ourselves with any kind of game. We traveled till we arrived at Pilot Butte, where two misfortunes befell us. A great portion of our horses were stolen by the Crow Indians, and General Ashley was taken sick, caused, beyond doubt, by exposure and insufficient fare. Our condition was growing worse and worse, and as a measure best calculated to procure relief, we all resolved to go on a general hunt and bring home something to supply our pressing necessities. All who were able, therefore, started in different directions, our customary mode of hunting. I traveled as near as I could judge about 10 miles from the camp and saw no signs of game. I reached a high point of land, and on taking a general survey, I discovered a river which I had never seen in this region before. It was of considerable size, flowing 4 or 5 miles distant, and on its banks I observed acres of land covered with moving masses of buffalo. I hailed this as a perfect godsend, and was overjoyed with the feeling of security infused by my discovery. However fatigued and weak, I accelerated my return to the camp and communicated my success to my companions. Their faces brightened up at the intelligence, and all were impatient to be at them. The general, on learning my intelligence, desired us to move forward to the river with what horses we had left, and each man to carry a pack on his back of the goods that remained after loading the cattle. He further desired us to roll up snow to provide him with a shelter, and to return the next day to see if he survived. The men, in their eagerness to get to the river, which is now called Green River, loaded themselves so heavily that 3 or 4 were left with nothing but their rifles to carry. Though my feelings toward the general were still unfriendly, knowing he had expressed sentiments concerning me that were totally unmerited, I could not reconcile myself to deserting him in his present helpless condition. Accordingly, I informed him that if he thought he could endure the journey, I would make arrangements to enable him to proceed along with the company. He appeared charmed with the magnanimity of the proposal and declared his willingness to endure anything in reason. His consent obtained, I prepared a light litter, and with the assistance of 2 of the unladen men, placed him in it in the easiest position possible. Then, attaching 2 straps to the ends of the litter bars, we threw them over our shoulders, and taking the bars in our hands, hoisted our burden, and proceeded with all the ease imaginable. Our rifles were carried by the 3rd man. The anxiety of the general to remain with us prevented his giving utterance to the least complaint, and we all arrived in good season on the banks of the Green River. We were all rejoiced to find that our companies who preceded us killed a fine buffalo, and we abandoned ourselves that evening to a general spirit of rejoicing. Our leader in a few days entirely recovered, and were thus, by my forethought in bringing him with us, spared the labor of a return journey. We all feasted ourselves to our heart's content upon the delicious coarse-grained flesh of the buffalo, of which there was an unlimited supply. There were besides plenty of wild geese and teal ducks on the river. The latter, however, I seldom ventured to kill. One day several of us were out hunting buffalo, the general, who by the way was a very good shot, being among the number. The snow had blown from the level prairie, and the wind had drifted in at deep masses over the margins of the small hills, through which the buffalo had made trails just wide enough to admit one at a time. These snow trails have become quite deep, like all snow trails in the spring of the year, thus forwarding us a fine opportunity for lurking in one trail and shooting a buffalo in another. The general had wounded a bull, which, smarting with pain, made a furious plunge at his assailant, burying him in the snow with a thrust from his savage-looking head and horns. I, seeing the danger in which he was placed, sent a ball into the breast just behind the shoulder, instantly dropping him dead. The general was rescued from almost certain death, having received only a few scratches in the adventure. After remaining in camp 4 or 5 days, the general resolved upon dividing our party into detachments of 4 or 5 men each, and sending them upon different routes, in order to better accomplish the object of our perilous journey, which was the collecting of all the beaver skins possible, while fur was yet valuable. Accordingly, We constructed several boats of buffalo hides for the purpose of descending the river and proceeding along any of its tributaries that might lie in our way. One of the boats being finished and launched, the general sprang into to test its capacity. The boat was made fast by a slender string, which, snapping with a sudden jerk, the boat was drawn into the current and drifted away, general and all, in the direction of the opposite shore. It will be necessary before I proceed further to give the reader a description, in the concise manner as possible, of the, quote, Green River Suck, end quote. We were encamped, as we had discovered during our frequent excursions, at the head of a great fall of the Green River, where it passes through the Utah mountains. The current, at a small distance from our camp, became exceedingly rapid and drew toward the center from each shore. This place we named the Suck. The fall continued for 6 or 8 miles, making a sheer descent in the entire distance of upward of 250 feet. The river was filled with rocks and ledges, and frequent sharp curves, having high mountains and perpendicular cliffs on each side. Below our camp, the river passed through a canyon, which is a deep river pass through a bluff or mountain, which continued below the fall to a distance of 25 or 30 miles. Wherever there was a eddy or growth of willows, there was sure to be a beaver lodge, the cunning creatures having selected that secluded and, as they doubtless considered, inaccessible spot to conceal themselves from the watchful eye of the trapper. To return to the general, his frail bark, having reached the opposite shore, encountered a ledge of rocks and had hardly touched when, by the action of the rolling current, it was capsized, and he thrown struggling into the water. Now, as Providence would have it, he reached the bluff on the opposite side, and holding on to the crevices in the high and perpendicular cliff, sung out lustily for assistance. Not a moment was to be lost. Someone must attempt to save him, for he could not hold his present position in such cold water long. I saw that no one cared to risk his life amid such imminent peril, so, calling to a Frenchman of the name of Hatrack, whom I knew to be one of the best swimmers, to come to the rescue, I threw off my leggings and plunged in, supposing he would follow. I swam underwater as far as I could, to avail myself of the undercurrent. This mode is always practiced by the Indians in crossing a rapid stream. I struck the bluff a few feet above the general. After taking a breath for a moment or two, I said to him, by the way, he was no swimmer, "There was only one way I can possibly save you, and I may fail in that, but you must follow my directions in the most minute degree, or we are certainly both lost." "Anything you say, James, I will follow," said he. Then I continued, "When I float down to you, place your hands on my shoulders and do not take hold of my neck. Then, when I give you the word, kick out with all your might, and we may possibly get across." I then let myself down to the general, who was clinging to the rocks like a swallow. He did as I had directed, and I started, he kicking in my rear like the stern wheel of a propeller, until I was obliged to bid him desist, for with such a double propelling power as we produced, I could not keep my mouth out of the water. We swam to within a few yards of the opposite shore, where the main suck caught us, and my strength becoming exhausted, we began slowly to recede from the shore toward inevitable death. At this moment Fitzpatrick thrust a long pole toward us. To the end of it he had attached a rope with the party on shore retained possession of. I seized the pole with a death grip, and we were hauled out our perilous situation. A few moments' delay, and the world had seen the last of us. After this rescue, the general remarked to Fitzpatrick, "That Beckwourth is surely one of the most singular men I ever met. I do not know what to think of him. He never speaks to me, except when absolutely unavoidable. Still, he's the first and only man to encounter peril on my behalf. 3 times he has now saved my life, when not another man attempted to succor me. He is a problem I cannot possibly solve." Agreeably to previous arrangement, on the following morning our company proposed to disperse in different directions. While preparing to leave our comfortable camp to take our chance in the mountains I happening to be out among the stock, the general inquired for me, and I was pointed out to him where I stood. "He is a singular being," he exclaimed. "He knows we're about to separate, yet he does not trouble himself to come and bid me goodbye. I must go to him." Approaching me, he said, "James, we are now about to part. These toilsome enterprises in the mountains are extremely dangerous, and although I hope to see you again, perhaps we may never meet more. I am under great obligations to you. You have several times rescued me from certain death, and by your skill in hunting, you have done great service to my camp. When my mind was irritated and harassed, I was betrayed into the use of language toward you, which I regrettably immediately after and still regret. I wish you would forgive me and desire to part in friendship. So long as you continue to use the same precaution as you have hitherto used, I can securely hope you will escape all accident and look forward to meeting you again under more auspicious circumstances." And he concluded by bidding me goodbye. I bade him goodbye, and we separated. And that should pretty much be the end of this Beckwourth story. And if you'd like, just keep it in your head that that's the end of the story. But there are actually 2 more paragraphs. Previous to this, and after his rescue from the suck, he mentioned to Fitzpatrick that I ought to have the lead of a party, and that he believed I was as capable as anyone in the company for it. Fitzpatrick told him he did not believe I would accept the responsibility. The general bade him ask me. He came and communicated to me our general's wish, and asked me if I would take the leadership of one of our detached parties. I declined the offer, assigning as my reason that I was too young to undertake the responsibilities of the charge, that this was my first trip to the mountains, and that I had a little experience in trapping, and that there were older men better qualified for the duty. The leadership of a party of a fur company is a very responsible post, placed similarly to a captain of a whaling vessel, where all depends on his success. If a captain is fortunate and returns from a profitable voyage, of course, in the eyes of the owners, he is a first-rate officer and stands well for the future. But if he has experienced unusual hardships and returns more or less unsuccessful, he is disgraced in his command and is thrust aside for a more fortunate man. It is just similar with trappers in the mountains. Whatever is their fortune, good or bad, the leader is the person of whom the praise or blame falls. End of story. And that was Chapter 5 from the life and adventures of James P. Beckwourth, mountaineer, scout, pioneer, and chief of the Crow Nation, written from his own dictation by T.D. Bonner. Thanks for listening. See you Sunday with episode 20, While Buffalo Roamed. Best wishes. Copyright 2025.